Well, it's always best to hope for the best and plan for the worst. And that's what we're going to look at the moment. What would happen if China invaded Taiwan? Peter Jennings, you've looked at this, so take us through the worst case scenario.
So, Chris, it's far from being the only scenario that we should think about, but an attack on Taiwan, I think, is perhaps the most likely flashpoint for a conflict in the Indo-Pacific. And most likely, we know this from China's behaviour over the last few years, it would start with a blockade, cutting of the internet cables into Taiwan, stopping air traffic and sea traffic into Taiwan. And from there, I think China would seek to win its objectives without military force, but if it couldn't do that, it would then launch significant missile strikes onto the air bases and the port facilities, attacking the Taiwanese military and attacking Taiwan's senior leadership. And then, much as Russia tried but failed to do in 2022, it might send in airborne forces to kill the political leadership and the senior military leadership of the Taiwanese government. I think only towards the end of that first stage of a conflict would we see a significant amphibious assault. And really what China would be looking to do would be to take over ports and airfields so it could land its forces that way. And the last possible thing that they would consider would be across the beach military landings. Whilst this is happening, the other thing China would be doing would be working as hard as it could to keep the Americans away, to keep Japan away, to use political and diplomatic means to try and keep Australia and any other democracy out of the conflict. That's how I think this would unfold in its early stages.
So the question for this cabinet is this something that Australia could sit out? And Jennifer Parker, could you kick us off and then everyone?
Yeah, thanks so much, Chris. Look, there are a lot of debates about how this could unfold. I think a blockade, to be honest, is quite unlikely because it allows countries that may choose to intervene time to choose how they intervene. I think we need to be very careful that it may involve a quick strike. And if it involves a quick strike, that's a difficult invasion of Taiwan. That's 100 nautical miles across the strait for a difficult island. I find it highly unlikely that if China makes that decision, I don't think they've made it yet, that they wouldn't necessarily attack Japanese and US forces in the vicinity, which means it is a regional conflict and it's not a decision about whether Australia is involved. Our ally and two partners have been attacked and the region is now in conflict, and that really impacts our national interest. So I think it's going to be broader and a lot quicker.
Mike?
Well, I think the counterfactual just needs to be considered, just to answer your question. How do we avoid it? So let's step back from the question of whether we should be in, or to Alexander's point about using a coalition to try to deter or defeat this. Let's say there's a government here that wants to sit it out. Here's what they'd have to do. They'd almost have to immediately abrogate the key provisions of ANZUS, because ANZUS actually requires more than consultation. It requires us to act together to meet a common danger, which includes an armed attack on one or the other party, including its armed forces in the Pacific area. So there's a treaty issue. The Americans would be entitled, unless we ripped up the treaties and closed Pine Gap and Northwest Cape down, to keep using those facilities to support their war operations, both Pine Gap and Northwest Cape. Northwest Cape, famously, going right back to Mr. Whitlam's day, communicates to US nuclear submarines, including with missile launch orders. Then the point of discretion that a government might have is to say no to forced projection from Australia. That would be a very, very big decision to take, to say no, you can't launch your submarines from Stirling, nor transit your B-2 bombers, say, through Tyndall.
Mick?
I think two other things to take into consideration here. The first one is it's very unlikely that if Xi did make this decision, it would just be a China on America thing. There would be strategic distractions on the Korean Peninsula and in Europe, which Australia would also have to think very seriously about. But the most important thing is Xi has to be absolutely assured that he will be successful. Whether he goes short or goes long, with a bolt from the blue or protracted conflict, he absolutely must be assured that he will be successful, because his position rests on it, and the legitimacy of the Chinese Communist Party probably does too. So the more we can influence his determination to do that and deter him personally from doing this, the better off the whole region will be.
Well, as we are saying about the working in alliance with other countries, I think that goes without saying. China is thinking about that too. And we're coming back to the comments that we made in the beginning of the session. So China Russia, North Korea, Iran. So how that unfolds will be absolutely concerning. And let's not forget that the threat to Australia is closer than we think. So think about last year, November, exercises of Russia and Indonesia. We should not forget about that fact. And although remaining non-aligned to any policy, so they're still doing these exercises. More than that, Russia has officially requested to place their military planes, nuclear bombers, and military transport planes on their bases. So they rejected today, but it doesn't mean that it will not change tomorrow.
Ross?
I think, can we sit this out? My view is we really can't. And Mike was right about the alliance. You'd have to effectively abrogate a lot of it. And I just point out to everybody in the recent Lowy Institute poll that 80% of the public said that they regarded the ANZUS alliance, or alliance with the United States, to be either important or very important for Australia's security. I think there'd be, I think the public would be in outrage if any government in current circumstances tried to walk away from the alliance relationship.
I think this is completely right. I don't think we would have any choice but to support the Americans in this scenario. But how would the scenario unfold will depend on how the Americans would react to it. See, I don't think it would be just a simple blockade. If I were developing China's strategy, what I would start to do is intercept shipping going into Taiwan for customs inspections and the like. So you wouldn't blockade it, but you would be disrupting it. And that would lead to a reaction from Taiwan, which might, of course, in turn lead to a reaction from the Americans. Though the Americans would be unsure. I know this from talking to the Americans about this Taiwan scenario. They seem quite unsure about what the president in the end would do. And it is true, though, that we either have an alliance or we don't have an alliance, and we need to think about that. If we decide we're not going to work with the Americans when the Americans get into conflicts, then we shouldn't bother with an alliance anymore, and we should just hope that the rest of the world will go away from us. I think it would be an absurd and a reckless decision for an Australian government to make not to support the Americans in this situation.